I'm going to share with you how I mix underground rap vocals. And there are mainly 5 steps to getting a great sounding vocals after you've recorded it. And that's cleaning up, fixing the dynamics, adding sweetness, cleaning up again, and then finally adjusting the vocals to the beat. And I've mixed a lot of rap songs over the years up until the point that I'm doing it professionally. And if you want to check out my work, you can go to subphotic.com/portfolio. So after watching this, you've removed a lot of guesswork and mess while mixing. Let's go! Now the first step is cleaning up the vocal track. And by this I mean removing unwanted sounds, removing unwanted frequencies, and removing unwanted dynamics. Unwanted sounds can be breaths, bodily sounds, sounds from other rooms leaking into the mic, background noise such as ventilators and refrigerators, and so on and so forth. The first thing I'll typically do is removing sounds when there are silence. So for example, coughs, clicks, pops, whatever. And then I'll go more surgically in and reduce breaths. And there are different types of breaths. You have the typical those I'll tend to reduce by a decibel or 2 or 3. But the other type of breath is when the rapper is getting tired in his voice and it goes like that sound, I'll decrease with another 10 dB for those. And the first breath in a verse, I tend to just remove entirely. That's just by experience. I think that sounds a lot better. And I'll do this manually. There are plugins for this, such as the iZotope RX breath control. A gate can also work, but for the whole vocal track, it's a bit hit and miss. I think it's best to do it manually, like this. Mark the region and then decrease the volume. You can also use automation for this, drawing in automation for the breaths. And then finally, you can use a noise suppressor such as the RX Denoise, has some great options there. And then you want to remove unwanted frequencies and you just pull up an EQ. You can use the stock EQ in your DAW. The first thing I do is I check there's no low end rumble. So I just use a high pass filter up until maybe 100 Hertz, but I experiment. I don't want to do too much. I use a 6 or 12 decibel slope and I'll just cut until I can hear it beginning to get thinner in the low end, and then I'll back off. And just put up a bell band, boost it a bit, narrow down the Q, sweep the frequency spectrum and look for whenever the sound is being boosted. Somewhere it might be a bit loud, there you can notch down a bit. No, don't cut too much. 2 or 3 decibels is often enough. And you can also do this dynamically using the Pro Q3 or the free TDR Nova is good for this. And then finally, you want to remove unwanted dynamics. And by that, I mean rogue peaks, such as clicks and pops, for example, exaggerated Ks or Ps, or whenever you see the spikes in the waveform, you can just manually turn that down or use automation to turn that down, because then you don't put that much strain on the compressor, making a better, cleaner result. So that was step 1, cleaning up the vocal track by removing unwanted sounds, removing unwanted frequencies, and removing unwanted dynamics. Now comes step 2, fix dynamics. To fix the dynamics, you can either compress, I like to compress in series, use parallel compression, or you can use even saturation or clipping. My favorite way of fixing dynamics is compressing in series. And what I do is I pull up a standard compressor, such as the Pro C2 from FabFilter, or DAW's stock compressor, such as the Logic compressor right here. And I just use it in the standard vanilla mode, in the blue mode, fast attack, medium release, and I'll pull down the threshold, typically between 4 and 8 decibels of gain reduction, depending on the source. Just make sure that the input signal and the output signal is more or less the same, such as this. You might get fooled by the variations in levels, and you want to avoid that by matching the gain in and out of the plugin. And that goes for all processing all along in the mixing session. You always want to have the input and the output roughly at the same level. And then comes the next compressor, because this is compression in series. I like to use a more colorful compressor, such as the LA2A or 1176, depending on the source material. What I will do here is to have a slower attack to let the transients a bit more through, a bit faster release to really emphasize the coloration of the compressor. And then I like to use parallel compression. I have a whole video about parallel compression. You can check it out there if you wanna. I'll basically use an aux track or a separate channel, and then I will compress it like crazy, and then I will blend in with the original original dry signal. In combination with serial compression, it's really great because you get more weight and body of the sound and you get more dynamic control. Fixing the dynamics, I will also use saturation such as clipping at times, not that often with vocals, but sometimes when a vocal is really dynamic and puts a lot of strain on the compressor, I would tend to use a saturator or a clipper such as the classic clipper from IK Multimedia or even the stock Chroma Glow in Logic. The saturation works sort of like a compressor because it shaves off the peaks and makes the dynamics a bit more consistent, especially regarding to the peaks. Now, if you had any value out of this video so far, hit the like button. Consider subscribing if you want more tips on mixing and mastering your own music. And let's head over to step number 3, adding sweetness to the vocal track. So the first thing that I think of when adding sweetness is to boost in the frequency spectrum. Then I use a lot of sound effects, for example, reverbs and delays. And at times I like to use special effects such as pitch shifters, chorus, phasers, flangers, and etc. Tape stops, what have you. Now, when it comes to boosting in the frequency spectrums, I like to use tube EQs or emulation of old school hardware EQs that has some saturation going on already. Classic Pultec trick comes to mind where you boost, for example, in the 10K area or the 12K area just to get some extra sheen on the vocal track. And then you simultaneously cut so that you don't add that sharpness to it. An alternative is to use a multiband compressor to just boost and then compressing so that you have the best of both worlds. You boost the good stuff and then you reduce in volume the bad stuff. And the same goes for multiband saturation, adding some tape distortion or tube distortion, and then you can boost the signal. Since it saturates, it will tame the peaks so that you don't have those sharp tones piercing through. And when it comes to sound effects, I like to create buses for the sense so that reverb and delay and other time effects don't get put in as an insert on the track itself. And then I'll just insert, for example, a reverb. I like having a quick reverb, a slow reverb, and the same goes for delays. And I like to automate them. So sometimes you hear an echo throw and other times you hear the reverb being taken away and then it comes back. And I like to experiment with that. And for rap, it's always really subtle. I have a couple of videos about reverb and delay for rap music, for rap vocals. You might want to check those out. I'll link to them in the description below. And then comes the special effects. I like to experiment with several effects to just subtly make stuff happen in the background. I like to do it on background vocals, but also on lead vocals. I can do it, but really, really subtly. I'll use auxes for them as well. So I'll just blend them slightly in so that it's not really audible, but you can feel it, you can sense it. You can have, for example, a pitch that moves 5 semitones down or 7 up or both, and then you create more fatness because you only blended it a couple of percents. And I also like the Valhalla Supermassive. I really recommend that. It's a free plugin where you can do some really otherworldly stuff with. Another reverb plugin that I recommend is the Taped Spaces from Half-Lights. They have some really cool stuff going on if you want some real texture. All these sound effects and auxes can be really tedious to set up every time you have a mixing session going on. So I really recommend you to make a template, or you can download my templates. They're specifically geared towards mixing, so you might go grab them. Everything is set up, ready to go, and you can even use those as a template because they're templates and make them your own. So go grab them. Subphotic.com/logic. Go get them. Now, step number 4 is sort of like a repetition of the first step, cleaning up. Now you have to clean up again because now you've added a lot of compression, a lot of sweetness, a lot of experimental stuff. Now you need to back off a bit, zoom out, as you can say, and listen, what have I added? What have I removed? And which problems has occurred now? You might want to use some clip gain, maybe automation, and you can also fix bad stuff using a dynamic EQ or a de-esser. Now, when it comes to those random parts in your vocal track that suddenly has become sharp or dull sounding, you can treat those manually by making a new track and adding them there, and then remove some of the processing that you have been doing. So that's a quick fix if there are few. If there are many, for example, all the S's are sharp or sibilant or what you call them, you can use either a de-esser or a multiband compressor or dynamic EQ preferably, because those are more surgical. Then you can just find the problem S's and then compress them. And that's basically what a de-esser does. One of my favorite de-essers include the Iosis de-esser. I like the FabFilter one, the FabFilter Pro DS. And I think the stock Logic de-esser also works wonders at times. And when it comes to dynamic EQs, the Pro Q3 comes to mind, and also the TDR Nova, as I mentioned before. But I really wanted to emphasize the importance of being critical after you've done all the processing, because you really want to listen back and check that you haven't made anything worse. That's the most important thing. Now, finally comes step number 5, and that is adjusting the vocal track to the beats. What I would typically start with here is using a reference track and listen back to the reference, adjusting the volume of the vocal according to the reference. I would use some volume automation. I would add some bus compression to both the beats and the vocal so that they can swing together in the same groove. And then I would use some sidechain compression to let the vocal through and clamp down on the frequencies from the beats that is messing with the intelligibility of the vocals. And I made a couple of videos that you really should check out if you're struggling with adjusting the vocal track to the beats, and you can go watch them right there. I hope I see you there. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.